Hi, you are watching Revenge of Reddit.
I used to think that blood meant loyalty. That family was an unshakable fortress built from love, shared history, and mutual respect. But I learned painfully and early that blood can also be a chain, one that binds you to people who will never see your worth, no matter how brightly you burn. My name is irrelevant now. They remember it, of course, but they whisper it with a trembling mixture of awe and fear, not affection. Once, though, that name was spat at me like an insult. It was the name of the family's disappointment, the child who would never amount to anything, the daughter who should have been born a son, the sister who embarrassed them at every turn. I grew up in a house where every glance was a judgment, every word a subtle cut. My father, a titan of industry, a man who wore arrogance like a crown, barely looked at me. My mother, perfectly polished and perpetually dissatisfied, pretended I wasn't there. And my siblings? They delighted in my humiliation. At every dinner, every holiday, every gathering, they paraded their achievements like trophies before me. My brother, the golden boy, was destined to inherit the company. My sister, the socialite, was praised for her connections and elegance. And me? I was too sensitive, too impractical, too emotional. They said I lacked business instinct, that I would never survive in the real world. I remember one birthday, my 21st, when my father raised a glass and toasted to my siblings' future success, deliberately skipping me. Maybe one day you'll find something you're good at, he added with a chuckle, the table erupting in laughter. That night, I cried until my body ached, but in that ache, a seed was planted. I swore to myself that I would never give them the satisfaction of being right. I wouldn't beg for their approval. I wouldn't waste another breath trying to belong. I would build something that would force them to look up at me. It started small, painfully small. A rented apartment the size of a storage closet, a borrowed laptop, an idea that everyone mocked. But I had one thing they underestimated, a hunger forged from years of humiliation. And hunger, when focused, is the sharpest blade. I worked when they slept. I learned when they mocked. I failed. Oh, I failed countless times. But every failure was a stepping stone. They said I lacked instinct. Yet I saw opportunities they were too arrogant to notice. They said I was too emotional. But it was that emotion, that burning, relentless fire, that kept me moving when reason said stop. 5 years later, I founded my first company. 10 years later, I sold it for a fortune they couldn't even fathom. 15 years later, I built an empire, an interconnected network of enterprises spanning technology, real estate, fashion, and hospitality. Quietly, silently, while they were busy laughing, I was buying their suppliers, their investors, their future. And then came the day of reckoning. It was a rainy afternoon when I received the invitation, embossed with gold, dripping with self-importance. Family Reunion Annual Gala, it read. At first I almost threw it away, but then I smiled. It was time. Time for them to see. Time for them to choke on the reality they had dismissed. I arrived at the hotel, my hotel, an hour before the event. They didn't know, of course. They thought they were hosting it in one of the city's most exclusive venues, never realizing that I had bought the entire chain 3 years earlier. I watched from the mezzanine as they entered, laughing and posing for photographs, oblivious to the irony of celebrating their success in a palace I had built. And then I descended the stairs. The room fell silent. For a moment, they didn't recognize me. I was no longer the timid girl they had ridiculed. The years had carved strength into my posture, steel into my voice, and authority into my gaze. My dress, tailored to perfection, whispered wealth. The entourage that followed me spoke of power. "Is that her?" I heard my sister whisper, her voice quivering. I walked past them without a word, each step deliberate, measured, heavy with the weight of years they had dismissed. My father approached me, his practiced smile faltering. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, as if he were the host. "Oh, I had to come," I replied coolly. After all, it would be rude not to attend a celebration in one of my properties. His smile froze. My mother's glass slipped slightly in her hand. My brother's jaw tightened. "Yes," I continued, my voice slicing through the room. "I own this hotel, and the vineyard that produced the wine you're drinking, and the logistics company that delivered the decorations. In fact, I suppose you could say I've provided most of tonight's experience." A hush swept over the crowd. My sister tried to laugh it off. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" I asked, tilting my head. The silence that followed was sweeter than any applause. For years I had dreamed of this moment, not for revenge, but for validation. But as I stood there, watching their faces crumble under the weight of truth, I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. Their opinions were meaningless, their approval irrelevant. Still, I wasn't done. I turned to my father, the man who once told me I'd never be more than a footnote. "You built a company, father," I said. "Impressive, but I built a world. And unlike yours, mine doesn't depend on legacy or bloodlines. It stands because I willed it to exist." He tried to speak, but words failed him. My mother looked as if she'd seen a ghost. My siblings stood there, stripped of their arrogance, their superiority shattered. And in that silence, that beautiful, heavy silence, I felt a peace I had never known. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. About reclaiming every fragment of dignity they had tried to strip from me. About standing tall, not as the daughter they rejected, but as the woman who rose beyond them. That night, I left the gala before dessert was served. I didn't need to stay. They would talk about me long after I was gone. They would try to rewrite history, to minimize my achievements, to pretend they had always believed in me. Let them. I know the truth. And the truth is this: I am not the girl they mocked. I am not the failure they dismissed. I am the storm they never saw coming. And I have only just begun. When I stepped into the night air outside that gala, I didn't feel triumphant in the way I had once imagined. There were no fireworks in my chest, no euphoric laughter. Instead, there was a calm, a quiet, profound stillness that felt more powerful than any victory parade. For the first time, I realized that I no longer needed their recognition. I had built a life so vast and self-sustaining that their opinions were like the buzzing of insects against the walls of a skyscraper. Insignificant, powerless, but still part of me wanted them to understand. Not for revenge, but for perspective. I wanted them to see the cost of their cruelty. The nights I spent awake, teaching myself skills they said I couldn't learn. The humiliations that hardened into resolve. The endless doors slammed in my face, doors I would later buy outright. 2 weeks after the gala, I received a call from my father's assistant. There was a problem, she said. The family company was in trouble. Poor investments, outdated strategy, an inability to adapt. The empire he'd spent a lifetime building was teetering. And then came the words I never thought I'd hear. They'd like to meet with you, privately. For a moment, I considered ignoring the request. Why should I help the people who had laughed while I struggled? Why should I throw them a lifeline now that they were drowning? But then I remembered something. Power isn't just about rising. It's about deciding who gets to rise with you. I agreed to the meeting. We gathered in the boardroom of their headquarters, a room I had once been forbidden from entering as a child. The long mahogany table, the panoramic view of the city, the portraits of ancestors staring down from the walls. It was all so familiar and yet so small now. My father sat at the head of the table, his posture more fragile than I remembered. My mother was beside him, silent, her pearls clutched like a rosary. My brother and sister avoided my gaze. "Thank you for coming," my father began. His voice, once booming with certainty, was measured now, almost hesitant. "We need your help." I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "My help," I repeated, as if tasting the words. He nodded. "Your experience, your resources, perhaps a partnership." I almost laughed. A partnership? After decades of dismissal, after every sneer, every insult, now they wanted a partnership. Why me? I asked softly. Surely the real successors of the family can handle it. No one spoke. My brother's jaw clenched. My sister stared at the floor. My mother shifted uncomfortably. And then my father sighed, a deep, defeated sound that I had never heard from him before. "Because," he said, "you're the only one who knows how to build something that lasts." For a long moment, I just watched them. I thought about every cruel word, every dinner where they pretended I didn't exist. I thought about that birthday toast, the one where they toasted to a future that didn't include me. And now, here they were, asking for the keys to survival from the daughter they had once disowned. It would have been easy to say no, to walk out and let them watch everything crumble. But easy isn't the same as right. "I'll help," I said finally, "but on my terms." They shifted uneasily. "What terms?" my father asked. "First," I said, "I take control, complete control. I run the company, restructure it, and make the decisions. No interference." My brother bristled. "You can't just..." I raised a hand, and he fell silent. "Second," I continued, "the company will no longer be a monument to your ego. It will become part of my network. Absorbed, modernized, rebuilt. The family name stays, but it will no longer define the empire. And third," I said, leaning forward, "you will never again question my worth. Not in public, not in private, not even in your thoughts. You will treat me with the respect I earned, not the respect you think I deserve." The room was silent. My father's face was pale. My mother blinked back tears. My siblings looked like children caught in a storm they didn't understand. "Do we have a deal?" I asked. They agreed. They had no choice. The following months were a whirlwind. I tore down outdated systems, replaced archaic leadership, and rebuilt the company from the ground up. I transformed it from a lumbering relic into a global powerhouse. Not a monument to my father's legacy, but a living, breathing part of my empire. And the family, they watched in stunned silence as I did what they had always believed was impossible. My brother, once so sure of his destiny, now reported to me. My sister, who had mocked my lack of sophistication, now sought my approval for branding campaigns. My father, who had once called me a failure, now deferred to my judgment. But the most remarkable change was not in them. It was in me. I had always imagined that victory would feel like revenge, that I would savor their humiliation. But instead, it felt like closure. Like finally setting down a weight I'd carried for too long. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my father stopped me in the hallway. His face was older now. His once commanding presence diminished. "You were always stronger than I thought," he said quietly. "I see that now." I studied him for a long moment. "No," I replied. "I was always stronger than you wanted me to be." He nodded, accepting the truth in my words. And for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Respect. Years passed. The company, now just one jewel in my ever-expanding crown, thrived under my leadership. The family name, once a source of shame, became a symbol of transformation. People no longer spoke of me as a forgotten daughter. They spoke of me as a visionary, a pioneer, a force that had reshaped industries. But beyond the headlines, beyond the wealth and accolades, there was something deeper. I had built not just an empire, but a legacy. One forged not in privilege, but in perseverance. Not in inheritance, but in defiance. And one day, standing on the balcony of my headquarters, watching the city stretch endlessly beneath me, I realized something profound. The greatest revenge is not destroying those who doubted you. It's living a life so extraordinary that their doubt becomes meaningless. I had done more than prove them wrong. I had rendered their judgment irrelevant. Sometimes I still visit the old family estate. It's quieter now. The halls less grand, the laughter less certain. My parents are older, gentler. My siblings more humble. They treat me with the reverence they once reserved for themselves. But I don't visit to gloat. I visit to remember. I walk the halls where I once felt invisible, and know that I will never be invisible again. I stand in the room where they told me I'd never succeed and smile at the irony. Because the truth is, I needed their rejection. Without it, I might never have found my strength. I used to think I was the black sheep, the disappointment, the mistake. But I see now that I was the spark, the one they underestimated, the one they tried to snuff out, the one who lit the fire that changed everything. And if I could speak to that younger version of myself, the girl crying alone on her 21st birthday, I would tell her this: one day they will know your name, and they will speak it with reverence. The irony is that now, when they introduce me at events or speak of me to their friends, they use words like visionary, self-made, pioneer. They conveniently forget the years they spent calling me hopeless and wasteful. They erase the sneers, the dismissive looks, the whispered jokes behind my back. And I let them, because I no longer need their apology. Their revisionist history is just another monument to my success. Proof that I rewrote the narrative so completely that even they have forgotten how it once read. But the scars remain. They don't ache anymore. But they remind me. They remind me of the power of being underestimated, of how dismissal can become rocket fuel, how cruelty can be alchemized into strength. And they remind me of the thousands of people out there who are right now sitting in the dark, believing the lies their families told them, believing they are worthless, incapable, destined to fail. So I built something for them too. It started as a small initiative, a scholarship fund for girls in underprivileged communities. But it grew just like everything I've ever touched. Soon, we had mentorship programs, startup accelerators, networks for women who had been written off by their own families. I met countless young women who looked at me with the same hopelessness I once saw in the mirror. And I told them the truth. You are not broken. You are not a failure. You are simply unfinished. And every time one of them launched a business, or patented a new technology, or walked onto a stage to accept an award, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt vindicated. Not just for myself, but for all of us, who were told we would never be enough. Years turned into decades. My empire expanded beyond anything I had once dreamed. Cities bore my name. Foundations, schools, hospitals, all built from the vision of the girl they had once laughed at. And yet, no matter how vast my world became, I never forgot that moment, standing outside my own family's door, unwelcome. That moment shaped everything. One day, many years after that first triumphant gala, I received another invitation. This time for my father's 80th birthday. It wasn't like the old invitations. There was no gold embossing, no pomp, just a simple handwritten card. "Please come home," it said. I hesitated. It had been so long since I'd set foot in the house where I grew up. Part of me didn't want to go back, not because I feared them, but because I no longer belonged there. But curiosity, and maybe something softer, something resembling forgiveness, drew me back. The estate looked smaller than I remembered. The hallways, once intimidating, now seemed narrow. My father was in the study, sitting by the fire. He looked frail, not the towering figure who had once ruled over our family like a king, but just an old man who had outlived his arrogance. "You came," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I did," I replied, standing before the same man who had once refused to toast to my future. We sat in silence for a long time. Then he spoke. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About you. About everything." I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. "I thought strength meant control," he continued. "I thought success was about dominance. But you taught me that it's about resilience, about rising even when the world tries to bury you." Still, I said nothing. Not because I was cold, but because I had already forgiven him long ago. In my own way. He looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. And there it was, the sentence I had once ached to hear. The sentence that had haunted me for so many years. But now, standing on the other side of a life I had built without him, it felt different. Not meaningless, but unnecessary. "Thank you," I said softly. "But I didn't need you to be." We spoke for hours that night, about the past, about the mistakes, about the legacy I had built. And as the fire crackled and the shadows grew long, I realized that I no longer hated him. I didn't even resent him. He was just a man shaped by a different time, a different world. And I was something he could never have imagined. When I left that night, I felt lighter, freer. I had closed the last chapter of a story that had defined my entire life. In the years that followed, my parents passed on. My siblings moved abroad, pursuing quieter lives under the shade of my empire. The family that had once belittled me now existed in the footnotes of a legacy far greater than any of us could have imagined. And as for me, I kept building, not because I needed to prove anything anymore, but because creation was in my blood, because the same relentless drive that once grew from pain had become my greatest joy. Today, when people speak of me, They don't mention the ridicule, the rejection, the years of obscurity. They speak of innovation, of power, of transformation. And I let them, because that's the story now. But late at night, when the city lights shimmer below my penthouse windows and the world grows quiet, I sometimes close my eyes and picture that younger version of myself again. The one standing on the outside, trembling small, unheard. I want to reach through time and take her hand. I want to tell her, they will try to define you. They will try to bury you. But one day, you will stand so high above them that their words will be nothing but echoes. One day, the very people who tried to silence you will quote your speeches, follow your footsteps, and beg for your approval. One day, the girl they rejected will become the woman who writes history. And perhaps the most beautiful part of it all is this. My story isn't unique. Every person who has ever been underestimated carries the same potential. Every failure has the chance to become a force. Every whispered insult can become a battle cry. I am living proof that rejection is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the spark that, if nurtured, becomes an inferno. So, if you're listening to this, if you have been told you're not enough, not smart enough, not strong enough, not worthy, let my story be your reminder. They don't get to decide who you are. They don't get to write your destiny. You do. Rise, build, conquer. And when you stand on the summit of everything they said you couldn't achieve, don't look back for their approval. Look forward and keep climbing, because the greatest revenge is not revenge at all. It is becoming everything they said you could never be, and then some. It's strange, isn't it? How life has a way of circling back. How the same places that once made you feel small eventually become monuments to how far you've come. Sometimes I walk through the old neighborhood where I grew up, past the school where teachers told me I wasn't a leadership material, past the cafe where my siblings used to laugh about my ridiculous dreams. And I smile, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Every insult, every dismissal, every door slammed in my face built the fire that still burns inside me today. I used to believe that success was about proving them wrong. That one day I'd hold my achievements up like a shield and say, "See, I told you I could do it." But the truth is, the higher you climb, the less you care about the opinions below. Proving them wrong stops being the goal. You stop climbing to show them. You climb because the view from the top is breathtaking. And the view from here? It's everything I imagined and more. I sit on the board of global companies. Governments consult me on economic strategies. My signature can shift markets. But beyond all the titles and influence, there's something even more powerful. Freedom. I no longer need permission to dream, to create, to be. I no longer seek validation. I am my own standard. Still, there are moments, small, unexpected moments, when the past brushes against the present. Like the time I attended a charity gala and ran into one of my old teachers. He looked at me with wide eyes, stammering out a greeting, clearly unsure if I remembered him. Oh, I remembered. I remembered how he once told me I lacked the discipline to succeed. But instead of resentment, I felt something else. Amusement. I thanked him for the lesson. Not the one he intended, but the one I learned in spite of him. Or the day a former classmate, one who had ridiculed me for my unrealistic ambitions, applied for a position at one of my companies. His resume was impressive. I hired him. And when he nervously approached me on his first day, I simply said, "Welcome aboard." There was no need for revenge. The imbalance spoke for itself. Even my siblings, once so proud and dismissive, now treat me with a kind of cautious reverence. They call for advice. They ask for introductions. And sometimes they even thank me. The power dynamic has shifted so completely that it's almost comical. The very people who once believed I was beneath them now orbit my world. And yet, despite all this, I never rub it in their faces. I don't need to. My existence is proof enough. My success is the loudest silence they will ever hear. There's a misconception about people like me. People who rise from rejection to dominance. They think we're fueled by hatred, that our ambition is rooted in bitterness. But the truth is, hatred burns out. Bitterness corrodes from within. What truly fuels us is something deeper, clarity. The clarity of knowing that we are capable, that we are powerful, that we are worthy, even when no one else believes it. I learned that clarity the hard way. And once you find it, it becomes your compass. It guides you through every storm, every obstacle, every betrayal. And betrayal. Oh, there were many. Not just from family, but from people I trusted along the way. Business partners who stole ideas. Friends who disappeared when I failed. Lovers who couldn't handle my ambition. Each betrayal hurt, but each one taught me something. I learned who deserved a seat at my table. I learned the difference between loyalty and convenience. And most importantly, I learned that I could survive alone. That's the secret no one tells you. Once you learn that you don't need anyone's approval, you become unstoppable. Looking back, I think the most satisfying part of this entire journey isn't the empire I built or the power I hold. It's the woman I became in the process. Stronger, sharper, unapologetically myself. I no longer apologize for being too ambitious or too driven. I no longer shrink myself to make others comfortable. I don't dull my edges to fit into the mold they built for me. I outgrew that mold long ago, and now I build my own. People often ask me if I've forgiven my family. The answer is yes, but not in the way they think. Forgiveness to me isn't about saying, it's okay. It's about saying, you no longer have power over me. It's about reclaiming the narrative and moving forward without the weight of their judgment dragging me down. Do I wish things had been different? Perhaps. It would have been nice to grow up in a family that believed in me, that nurtured my potential instead of mocking it. But if they had, maybe I wouldn't have become who I am. Maybe I wouldn't have built this empire. Maybe I would have been content with the mediocrity. Their rejection was painful, but it was also the greatest gift they could have given me. Because when the world tells you that you're nothing and you become everything, you realize that the power was never theirs to give. It was yours all along. Sometimes I speak to young women at conferences and workshops, and I always end with the same words. They will doubt you. They will laugh. They will tell you that you are reaching too high, dreaming too big. Let them. Because one day, if you stay relentless, they will look up and realize that the very sky they tried to cage you beneath is now the empire you built. And that is the legacy I want to leave behind. Not just wealth or power, but proof. Proof that no amount of doubt, ridicule, or rejection can stop someone who refuses to be defined by others. If my story teaches anything, let it be this. You are not the names they call you. You are not the limits they place on you. You are not the sum of their expectations. You are the architect of your destiny. And when you finally stand on the summit of everything they said was impossible, do not waste a second looking back for their applause. Simply smile and keep going, because there is always another summit, always another dream, always another impossible thing to achieve. I am no longer the disappointment, no longer the failure, no longer the mistake. I am the storm, the architect, the empire. And this is only the beginning. Because the most beautiful part of a triumphant return isn't the moment they see you again. It's the moment they realize they never truly knew you at all. The woman who walked away was not the woman who returned. The woman who returned was forged in fire. And fire does not apologize for burning.